This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Palestinians protest the murder of a prominent activist, making some wonder how long Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas can continue to rule. Plus, Israeli teams lend a helping hand to those affected by the Miami condo tragedy. And to life, Israeli volunteers changing the world. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Recently, thousands of Palestinians have taken to the streets of Ramallah and Bethlehem to protest the death of Nizar Banat, a prominent critic of the Palestinian Authority. Some believe the unprecedented demonstrations could pose a serious threat to the rule of PA President Mahmoud Abbas. For months, Nizar Banat posted videos on Facebook accusing the Palestinian Authority of corruption and betraying the Palestinian cause because it worked closely with Israel. Banat also criticized PA President Abbas for canceling elections that had been scheduled for May. They would have been the first elections in 15 years, and Banat was a candidate. On June 24th, Banat's family says PA security forces burst into his home, beat him with iron rods, and arrested him. He later died in custody. After Banat's death and funeral, thousands mourned him in his hometown of Hebron. And in Ramallah, protesters marched on Abbas's headquarters, blaming the president for Banat's murder. They chanted, "The people want to overthrow the regime." PA Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh says Banat's murder is under investigation and vowed to prosecute those responsible.
Whoever is involved in this matter will be referred to the competent judicial authorities, which gives everyone their rights, and we ask the investigation committee to complete its report within the next 2 days.
Casting doubt on that effort, journalist Nadia Harhash expressed the frustration of many fellow Palestinians.
They didn't care and they killed him. That's why it's so dangerous that these people don't care about anything. They don't even care about publicity. They don't care about what anyone thinks of, because they know that they can get away with it.
The European Union, the main donor to the PA, wants an independent murder investigation. And the U.S. State Department said it was deeply disturbed by the reports that non-uniformed members of the Palestinian Authority security forces both harassed and used force against protesters and journalists. Harhash goes on to blame the international community for enabling Abbas to basically rule over a police state.
It's the international money that blesses what's happening to us, and they know that nobody is holding them accountable. And yet the international money enters their pockets. It's not a Palestinian internal affair. It is the international responsibility that we're getting killed because we speak out.
They must see that a 17-year dictator is now using the security apparatus, which is funded by US aid contributions, in order to crack down on dissidents, in order to quash democracy.
The high-profile murder and protests could also represent a serious threat to Abbas's leadership. Polls show his popularity is decreasing, while support for Hamas, the ruling body in Gaza, is growing. Following the recent Gaza conflict, a Palestinian poll showed Ismail Haniyeh of Hamas leading Abbas by 59% to 27%, a margin of more than 30 points. Before the war, Abbas led Haniyeh by a single percentage point.
It gained them tremendous amount of support within the Palestinian population, because that's unfortunately how you gain support, political support in the Palestinian sector.
That growth also elevated Hamas on the world stage. Lebanese President Michel Aoun welcomed the group's leader, who also visited Morocco, Mauritania, and Egypt. That tour happening while Abbas faces an uprising in the West Bank. For some, it's one more sign that the end of Mahmoud Abbas's rule could be just a matter of time. While the PA faces major challenges, Israel's new government is pressing ahead with international diplomacy. And as CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl explains, one of the key arenas is the United Arab Emirates that signed historic peace agreements known as the Abraham Accords with Israel last year.
New Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is the highest-ranking Israeli official to visit the United Arab Emirates since the signing of last year's peace agreement.
This is an historic moment, and it is a reminder that history is created by people who understand history but are willing to change it, people who prefer the future to the past.
In the capital of Abu Dhabi, Lapid dedicated the Israeli embassy in a ceremony that included Jewish prayers and placing a mezuzah on the doorpost.
Israel wants peace with all its neighbors. We aren't going anywhere. The Middle East is our home, and we are here to stay. So we call on all the countries of the region to recognize that and to come to talk to us.
Lapid also thanked leaders responsible for bringing the Abraham Accords to fruition, the first peace agreement between Israel and Arab nations in more than 25 years.
To Israel's former Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who was the architect of the Abraham Accords and who worked tirelessly to bring them about. I want to thank former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Since the agreement's signing, Israel has established several $100 million worth of trade agreements with the UAE, and more than 200,000 Israeli tourists have visited there. Lapid also opened a consulate in the Emirate of Dubai.
It's a place of life, of tourism, of business, of dialogue between two talented peoples who can and who want to contribute to one another.
Ambassador Eitan Naeh, head of mission at the Israeli embassy in Abu Dhabi, told CBN News the Abraham Accords opened the way for a different future.
I think the Abraham Accords, first of all, are a dream and then a vision, and now we are down to realizing it, materializing it, and really rolling up our sleeves and starting the hard work of making it happen, creating a new model of peace and normalization in the Middle East, where cooperation is the key word.
Naeh said it doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but there's a strategic decision to build normal relations.
Within a few weeks, we will sign quite a few more agreements to really cement the cooperation and the relationships, to show peoples and governments in the region what the true close relationships look like.
Naeh said they want other countries in the Middle East to ask themselves, why not us too? Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
U.S. President Joe Biden ordered the U.S. military to carry out airstrikes against the bases of Iranian-backed militia groups near the border of Iraq and Syria. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said the militias were using the facilities to carry out drone attacks against U.S. troops in Iraq. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo discussed those attacks with CBN's David Brody.
Airstrikes the Biden administration has just completed, if you will, on some of these Iranian strongholds in Iraq and Syria. What do you make of that strategy?
I'm glad they did it. If you've got soldiers on the ground, you have to establish tactical deterrence. You have to make sure they know that there'll be a real cost. But second, if you allow proxy forces of the Iranians to fire at Americans, and the Americans turn around and fire back at the proxy forces, the Iranians feel no pain. We made clear that we weren't going to let the proxy forces serve as that intermediary to disconnect them from the risk. So we made clear if you had proxy forces come after us, we were going to go after Iranian targets. I hope this administration is prepared to do the same thing. If they're not, they're going to continue to suffer attacks and we'll have Americans killed.
What do you think of on Israel? As we rapid fire through some of these issues, and there's so much to unpack on each one. Naftali Bennett, what do you know about him? How confident are you that he will be as strong a leader as Benjamin Netanyahu? And evangelicals especially want to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, so only time will tell.
Sure.
I know Prime Minister Bennett some. I know, too, that he takes Israeli security very seriously.
Okay.
I also know he's got a coalition that I cannot figure out how he's going to manage. Right? It'd be
Razor thin.
It'd be like having the Freedom Caucus and AOC in the same caucus. It'll be really difficult politically for him to manage that process. And so I wish him well. It is important that this relationship between the United States and Israel stays strong. I regret that we're not doing our part. It doesn't look like the Biden team is leaning into the importance of this relationship in the way that the Trump administration did.
Coming up, Israeli teams join in the search and rescue effort at the Miami condo collapse. In Miami, there's an ongoing search for survivors at the deadly condo collapse, where work continues around the clock. Foreign search and rescue teams from Israel and Mexico are now on the scene. Officials say this is still a rescue mission, not a recovery. And the commander of Israel's team says he's seen the impossible happen before. Caitlin Burke has the story.
Of those still unaccounted for at the Surfside condo collapse, more than 24 are Jewish with connections to Israel. Now, an Israeli search and rescue team is on site, bringing decades of experience.
We came because people are here, lost their families, lost their relatives, lost their loved ones, and we are here as we are already doing in the last 35 years all over the world.
The Israeli team has seen this kind of disaster before, and the commander says he believes they can still find survivors.
Most like this place, a man alive 10 years ago in Haiti, after 100 hours, and we still have hope, but this site is very complicated, and I hope that we'll find someone.
United Hatzalah, an Israeli nonprofit that provides emergency medical response, is also in Miami. Their psychotrauma and crisis response unit meeting with anyone affected by the collapse.
What we're basically trying to do is we're trying to make this process of the waiting, of the unknowing, a process where they can be active, be effective, be helpful to the search and to one another by helping provide relief to one another, because they're all going through the same thing. They're all going through the same trauma.
Firefighters, who also make up elite federal search and rescue teams out of Miami, were some of the first to respond.
Just when we first arrived and what we saw, the horrific, catastrophic type of collapse. Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, we were able during that time frame to remove 37 individuals. 37 individuals. And we continue searching.
The Florida task force is now helping search through the rubble, looking for pockets of air or voids where survivors could be trapped. Governor Ron DeSantis says teams are working under grueling conditions, all with the goal of bringing victims home.
They understand that in every one of those condominium buildings were people whose our different families' world revolved around them, grandmothers, grandkids, brothers and sisters. And I just thank them for all their efforts, and I thank them for leaving no stone unturned. And the families, we're going to be there for the long haul on this.
As investigators continue to determine a cause, the Wall Street Journal publishing a letter it says was sent by the condo board's president in April, warning that significant repairs were needed and that the building had deteriorated since a 2018 inspection. An engineer who studied the 9/11 Pentagon attack has been hired to inspect the collapse, although it will likely be quite some time before any real questions are answered. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Up next, as America celebrates its independence on July 4th, one Israeli American offers advice on how the U.S. can learn from Israel. As America celebrates its independence on July 4th, the country is going through a political and cultural crisis. Now one Israeli American has written a book on how the U.S. can learn from the experiences of Israel to survive this crisis. Well, David Rubin, thanks for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline. Great to see you again.
Well, thank you, Chris.
Yeah. You've written a book called Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel. Why'd you write the book?
Well, it was during the George Floyd riots, when the American cities were burning, when all of the monuments to American heroes were being torn down or vandalized or under attack. They were changing names of schools and I just could not understand it, because here it's not like that. We have a very different approach to our heroes. And I felt something needed to be done about it. I started to research it, and that's how the book got started.
So what can America learn from Israel?
Well, first of all, it's important to learn from Israel's successes as well as Israel's mistakes. And Lord knows we've made a lot of mistakes too. So among our mistakes, socialism. From 1948 until the early 1980s, we were a socialist country, Democrat socialists, as AOC would say. In addition, We have the problem of appeasement. In Israel, we appeased the Palestinians for many years. We had the Oslo peace process, 1993, that lasted for about 25, 30 years, and it brought the worst waves of terrorism that Israel has ever experienced. In America, we have the defunding of the police movement, which is an appeasement, actually, of the rioters, of the looters, in the hope that that's going to please them. Well, the problem is that when you appease, it's like giving a chunk of meat to a wolf. It's going to eat the meat and then it's going to attack you. It's not going to be enough. Now Israelis understand that you cannot appease Muslim terrorists. It's important for Americans to learn that lesson as well about the radical secular left. When people are burning down monuments to American heroes, when people are burning American flags, when people are burning Bibles in these riots in American cities, in those cases it is definitely not about racism. It's not about protesting racism. It's about a Marxist revolution that is being spearheaded by movements like Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Talk about some of the Judeo-Christian values that undermine our civilization, and how can we protect those?
This has been a decades-old grassroots movement among the secular left to change the values of America, to tear down Judeo-Christian civilization. Now, the United States was built on Judeo-Christian values. The founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, they all had that connection with the values of Israel that are rooted in the Hebrew Bible. Those are values that are under attack today. They've been under attack since the 1960s, when the left-wing radicals of the 1960s went. They seemed like they were going establishment, but they really didn't go establishment. They just joined the establishment to gain power. The only way to combat it is to have a similar grassroots movement on the conservative side. Learn from Israel's successes, Israel's mistakes, the values of hard work, the values of family, of the traditional family. You know, we have the traditional families on the rise in Israel. It's a good thing here. And people are getting married more, people are having more children. We honor the traditional family of a father and a mother and children. And that is the basis for a good, healthy, productive life, not a life based on handouts. Yes, I want people to get active. I want people to get active on the grassroots level. It's not just looking for some savior in a president, in a senator. It's being active yourself.
That's a great message for today. Thanks for being with us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you, Chris.
Up next, CBN Documentary's inspiring film, To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. As you saw earlier in Caitlin Burke's story, Israeli teams are on the ground in Miami helping in the search and rescue operation for survivors and to help comfort and treat those suffering trauma. CBN Documentaries chronicled how Israelis reach out in times of trouble in all kinds of situations. It's in the film To Life, How Israeli Volunteers Are Changing the World. Take a look.
The massive earthquake killed nearly 9,000 people and injured 22,000 more. In just a few moments, hundreds of thousands of people had become homeless. The world mobilized to help. And among the first to arrive in Nepal were doctors from the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF.
I got a phone call, middle of the night, you're going.
We're now in Gangabu district inside the city of Kathmandu, which is one of the worst areas hit by the earthquake on last Saturday. As you can see here, the devastation is just enormous and the recovery process will take a long time.
Within 96 hours after the earthquake, We already have a field hospital here, fully operational.
The devastation in Nepal was extreme, but for the Israeli doctors, it was nothing new. When a catastrophic earthquake devastated Haiti in 2010, more than 200 IDF volunteers arrived in Port-au-Prince to help. In less than 12 hours, they built a hospital on this soccer field. And over the next 2 weeks, they treated more than 1,000 patients. The dedication and efficiency of the Israeli army doctors caught the attention of the worldwide media.
One unit has become legendary, the Israeli Medical Unit.
As you walk through this campus, it has military precision. You see a pediatric ward, you see a maternity ward, a newborn intensive care unit.
I've been here since Thursday. No one except the Israeli hospital has taken any of our patients.
I'm just amazed. I'm just amazed at what's here. This is like another world compared to the other hospital. My God, they have machines here. They have actual operating rooms, and it's just amazing.
Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.